Hey everybody, my name is Alexis Flores, and this is Communications AF. Real talk, more communicating. Every single episode, I'll be talking to some brilliant, influential, and kind neo-node friends about personal life stories, career moves, and everything else. And tonight, we'll be talking to Alicia Doyle, an award-winning journalist who discovered boxing at the age of 28 when she was working on a story. For 2 years, she simultaneously worked as a reporter while training and competing as a boxer, making her one of only a few hundred women in America who broke barriers in this male dominated sport. She went on to win two Golden Glove championship titles, and her pro debut at age 30 was named the California Female Fight of the Year. You can read all about her life and boxing career in her new book, Fighting Chance. Before we begin, this is a trigger warning that some talk about trauma, abuse, and domestic violence does occur during this episode. Hi, Alicia. Thanks for being here with us. I'm super excited to have you and to read your book, Fighting Chance. You guys can find it online and through your website. A really great story all about everything that you've accomplished and done within the journalism world, but also in the boxing ring, which is amazing. So before we get started with all of this, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, how you grew up, your family dynamic, all of that good stuff?
Oh, certainly. Well, my name is Alicia Doyle, and I was born in California, but we left after the earthquake in '71. So I was raised in a small suburb in Colorado. My mother was on her second marriage at that time, and my father on his second marriage as well. And so we were a blended family. And for a while, it was like a fairy tale. It was quite lovely. But, as some fairy tales go, it didn't have a typical fairy tale ending. My parents did end up getting divorced, and the household I grew up in was a bit volatile. My parents argued a lot. I did grow up in an atmosphere of violence. So that said, I had a rocky past, like a lot of people did. So that just created a certain construct and a certain way of being that I was raised in. And as an adult, there were a lot of things I had to filter through and figure out, simply because I didn't have the role modeling in place for me to understand it. And that's nobody's fault. My parents were human. They were beautifully human. They loved each other. It didn't work out. So, theirs was a love story turned upside down, but that's what I came into the world with. And there were quite a bit of struggles, and it's all outlined in the book. But all those hard things, and especially the struggles, are what made me who I am today. So the book largely explores, overcoming these traumas, embracing my shadow side, and learning the value and importance of self-love. And I did discover that in boxing, but that came much later.
Yeah, reading through your book, it definitely seemed how you did go into finding family within the boxing ring, but also then finding your own personal family within your brother Tony, and discovering like the mess and trauma of family is just that, it's a mess and it is trauma, but we all go through it. Even your parents went through it, and you wanted to break that cycle within yourself of like not letting that get to you. It definitely was very powerful reading the entire book, but also just learning more about the vulnerability of your family and everything you did go through. Is it okay if I mention some stuff from the book?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there was a part how you mentioned when your father was leaving, and at that moment what had happened and how you reacted. You were such a young girl that you like held on to him, and then when he like pushed you off of him, you went on to the door so that way you can block him from leaving, and and then later on in life you felt like the abandonment was there within your relationship within your boyfriend. And I know that can definitely be hard. And so for those of you who haven't read the book, or hopefully you guys do, there's a part of spousal abuse when you break up or when you end your relationship with your past ex. And that's definitely really hard. It kind of really went into you going into boxing. And why I bring that up is because there's a lot of individuals who are going through this. It definitely isn't an easy thing to go through, and it's not something a lot of people talk about. It's something that we hide. And you mentioned in your book, you never wanted someone to know about this. You never wanted to talk about it out loud. The reason why I want to bring it up is because you're not alone. You know, there's thousands, if not millions, of individuals who are going through this currently. Um, and it's definitely a hard topic to talk about, but is there anything that you can say on it?
Well, first of all, I appreciate your depth of understanding of the magnitude of people involved in violent relationships. And it doesn't only affect women, it affects men too. That vulnerability and that backstory side of myself was just a small piece of my history that I did not want anyone to know about. I was very ashamed. You know, people, you know, as an adult and as a journalist, people viewed me a certain way, and I wanted them to keep that image. I didn't want to reveal my insecurities, and I certainly didn't want people to know that I was in a violent relationship because, and I think a lot of women go through this, I thought it was my fault. I was embarrassed by it. I was ashamed that I allowed myself to become a statistic. I entered this relationship. I loved this man. So that was really a difficult thing to look at, to be so self-aware and to ask myself those hard questions, the whys. Why would I be in that relationship? Why would I love this man? Why would I allow somebody to hit me? And those questions are so much deeper because I realized it really goes back to self-love. And if I had really loved myself, I would never have gotten involved in this. I certainly wouldn't have stood for it. So that was a big thing I had to face, a big battle I had to face was, why didn't I love myself enough? You know, and certainly the vulnerability aspect of it, you know, growing up in violence, you know, my parents are beautiful people. Didn't want to share that family history just due to shame. I didn't want to shame my family. I didn't want to shame myself. But I also realized that vulnerability is the one thing that connects us all. It's the one thing we all share. And if I wasn't willing to be vulnerable and honest, that I would fail to make meaningful connections. So that was a big thrust of why I wrote the book. I felt it was important to help other people. And I knew that being vulnerable would be the gateway to connect and help other people.
Mm-hmm. And after that entire relationship ended, and the very next day, I want to say, you went to Kid Gloves, which was a saving grace for you. And that's kind of what pushed you over the edge to go into this thing that you didn't like before. You know, which is, it's funny that we turn to, I guess, the dark side of everything when things are going bad, but it can definitely lead to beautiful moments. And I feel like it has for you.
Yes, before I started boxing, or before I found boxing, or before I should say boxing found me, I viewed the sport as the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
I viewed it as violent. I had no understanding of the beauty and the depth of the sweet science. And it wasn't until I was sent out as a newspaper reporter to report on a boxing gym for at-risk youth that was destroyed, that I was opened up to this world. And it completely changed my life, the training and the self-esteem that I honed and just all the skills that I learned. But it really was a place where I could discover my inner strength. And yes, what got me into the boxing gym that day, because I had reported on this gym for about a year before I ever put on a pair of gloves. And the owner of the gym, his name was Robert Ortiz, had always asked me to take an aerobic boxing class. And these are no contact classes. You're not getting hit. But you get to punch a heavy bag for about an hour. And yes, the day after that horrible breakup, I showed up at the gym the next day and I was there to take the class, and that was it. I hit the heavy bag for an hour. And the one thing I noticed right away was I felt better after hitting that bag for an hour. I went in there with so much rage that hitting that bag was so difficult. It literally released me from what had just happened. It forced me to be in the present moment because the workout was so difficult, and it provided a respite from all the demons in my head. And because I felt better every time I did it, I kept doing it over and over again. And before I knew it, I was taking 3 aerobic boxing classes in a row, 6 days a week. And then that evolved into more training. And after the boxing classes weren't enough, I started training by myself on the sidelines because Kid Gloves Boxing, you know, there were champions there. They were always training with their coaches, preparing for fights. So I'd watch these guys training with their coaches, and I would mimic their moves. I'd watch how they hit, you know, a double end bag. I'd watch how they hit the speed bag. And I would go off in the corner. I would do it on my own. And this went on for a few months until a gentleman named Stan Ward walked into the gym from another boxing gym, and he just noticed me. I stood out. I was a girl, for one, being the only girl and working as hard as I was. He's the one that approached me and asked if I'd ever consider competing. And that's when he informed me that there were only a few hundred women in America, this is in the 1990s, competing in boxing at the time, and that it would be an opportunity for me to be a trailblazer and to help make the way for other women who wanted to box.
And a trailblazer you really were, with a whole bunch of just anger and rage that you went into the gym with. You really came out on top on a lot of different situations, going from the amateurs and boxing and losing your first fight to wanting to come back on top and just going for it. And it was always that I feel like that self-worth of what we just talked about earlier, coming back to you of like, am I not good enough? But I know your first fight was pretty difficult, and it took some toll on you. Go ahead.
It did, yes. My first exhibition match, and an exhibition is, it's supposed to be a fight that's not a fight. You fight an exhibition, but it doesn't go on the books per se. So it was really a test to see if I could move forward in competition, because you can train hours and hours a day, but if you can't get in the square for battle against an opponent, then there's no way you can move forward in boxing. So I had to do an exhibition. And I remember that fight like it was yesterday. And Fighting Chance in my book, I remember every fight like it was yesterday. So every single fight, I take the reader right into the ring. But this fight was against a girl named Layla McCarter. And I was 28 years old when I started boxing, which is considered late for athletics. So all my opponents were younger than I, and I was 28 years old. My opponent, Layla McCarter, was 19 years old. And she was a kickboxing champion. I found out on fight day when I was matched with her. And the minute I heard that, I was terrified. You know, she was seasoned. She had experience. She was a champion. So yes, that was a very, very hard fight. I got a standing 8 in the first round, but I ended up staying in the fight, and I fought all 3 rounds and walked out of that ring. And that's when I knew I was prepared. But what was interesting was just more of why was I staying in that ring when all I wanted to do was run away, and I was terrified. And a lot of it was because I had guys in the audience, guys from my gym who were there to root me on, but there were also competitors from other gyms that wanted to see me get knocked out. So, you know, a lot of it was ego-based and ego-driven. I didn't want to allow my haters to see me fall in there, so that's what kept me in there. But I pulled through, and it was a great experience, and that was my induction for real fighting after that.
Just for the people who don't know, what is a standing 8?
Oh, that's a great question. So a standing 8 is imposed during a fight if one fighter is in danger of being knocked out. So what happens is, like, the referee stopped the fight. I was the fighter in danger getting knocked out, and I'm standing there, and he's counting down on his fingers with 8. And in those 8 seconds, it has to be determined whether or not the fighter can go on. So after the 8 seconds, my coach asked, you know, are you okay? And I said, yes. But I wasn't okay, but I said, yes. And he's like, can you go on? And I nodded yes. Didn't want to, but I kept going. He went over to Layla's corner, told her to ease up a bit. Hey, this is an exhibition, ease up. But she wasn't trying to knock me out. She was just a fantastic fighter. Yeah. Very skilled. So yes, I mean, you know, 8 seconds, it doesn't sound like a long time, but when you're standing there, you know, thinking, can I continue this fight, or do I need to lay down? I mean, it's like an eternity. 8 seconds is an eternity. So there's an entire chapter in that book called Standing 8. and
Yeah.
it's about fight.
You know, in your book, you really go into detail on every single aspect of every fight, of every detail in your life. It's like we're experiencing it, like with you right there in that ring. Um,
Mhm.
and I know that that standing eight just basically a punch in your gut, really. Uh, and you were able to fight her again afterwards, and the outcome was different.
Yes, and not to reveal any spoilers, but
Mm-hmm.
yes, I had to face Layla McCarter again
Mm-hmm.
when I turned to amateurs. And the reason why was because in the 1990s, there were so few women in America competing at the time that when they were had national tournaments where women were finally invited to compete, women would come all over the nation, from all over the nation, but there were so few of us, it was very common for girls to fight the same girl more than once.
Yeah.
So yes, my first official amateur fight on the books was against Layla McCarter again.
And then I remember there was a part that you were like, please go into pro. Like, I don't want to fight you, go into pro. And then later on, you went to pro.
Yeah. After our fight in amateurs, yes, it's like I was just happy that we weren't. I didn't want to be in her weight class anymore. I didn't want her to turn pro because I just didn't want to face. Layla McCarter is a warrior.
Mm-hmm.
She's an incredible fighter. She's still fighting now. She's a multiple time world champion now, and she's just an incredible female role model for
Oh,
the
yeah.
sport.
Yeah, same as you. You know, in the book, you referred to the boxing as the hurt business.
Mm.
And so it's like, wow, that's completely true. Like, the amount of pain that you go through physically isn't nearly as much as the amount of pain you go through mentally. And you mentioned it, how you every single demon, every single fear that you have from right then and there to when you were young and in your early ages, like everything just comes out, and like you're fighting them all within the ring and outside. Every single
Mhm.
time that something happens, if it doesn't go your way, you psych yourself out, and it's something that I felt very relatable with, even though I'm not a boxer, just in general of life. And I feel this book has a lot of those moments of this doesn't need to just pertain to boxing. This is like a way of life afterwards, really.
Correct. Because my coaches would always instill that boxing was only maybe 10 to 20% physical, and the rest is mental. And I didn't. I believe me, I didn't expect boxing to become my salvation. I did not expect that. I thought it was all physical. It is so not just physical. Every time I would train, I was peeling away like the layer of the onion of myself, and every time I peeled away a layer, I saw another. I call them heartbreak pieces. The heartbreak pieces of, and we all are, every human being, I believe, is like a jigsaw puzzle or made up of all these pieces. And the heartbreak pieces are sometimes the hardest to fit in. They're the pieces we want to throw away and forget about forever. And for some reason, the boxing and being in the battle in the ring, it made me look at all those heartbreak pieces. And that was the most difficult part. I didn't want to relive those pieces. Certainly didn't want to remember these things, but I also realized by denying those parts of myself that I was denying the strongest parts of myself. I had to embrace and learn to love my dark pieces,
Yeah.
because the dark pieces, the hard stuff, those are the things that make me who I am. Those are the things that make me who I am.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a hard thing, that involves releasing resentment. That involves a lot of forgiveness. Letting go. And I used to hate those two words, just let it go. That's a process. It takes a lot of self-awareness and a lot of discipline. But the more I worked on it, the better I became at it. And it's not that now it's like, yay, I'm not, all the stuff and the person I was as a child and all those insecurities, that's still a part of me and she's still there. But now I'm able to just nourish her more, and honor her more, and honor, and tell her those heartbreak pieces and those dark pieces and those scars.
Yeah,
That's what make us who we are. We gotta
exactly.
love those parts of ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. There's, you speak about forgiveness, and there's one part in the book, again, I love this book, um, that your opponent comes up to you after the match and asks you for your forgiveness. And it
Mhm.
was, that was a huge aspect that I was like, whoa, like you wouldn't hear about that. And I think that's what it stood out to me, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and that's another thing too. I mean, it wasn't just the fights and the competitions, you know, that the book is about, but it's about all these beautiful things that occurred on the peripheral. You know, these incredible women, these amazing female warriors, and you were speaking very specifically about Shannon Ortiz, and she was my opponent in the first Golden Gloves championship title that I won. I won by technical knockout in the second round. And what was interesting about Shannon is that we trained out of the same gym. We were in the same gym, so we knew we were going to probably fight each other at some point. But she's on one side, I'm on the other side, and you know, there's this, you know, there's rivalry, tangible rivalry. So that went on in the weeks that we were preparing for the fight. And let's just say it wasn't the friendliest relationship she and I had. But after the fight, I'll never forget it. She walked into that gym and she was in plain clothes. I barely recognized her because she wasn't in all her mean gear. And she was beautiful. And she just walked up to me and asked for my forgiveness. You know, that she should have been more supportive, et cetera, et cetera. You know, of course I forgive you, Shannon. You know, she was just being human. You know, she's just, you know, we all have parts of ourselves that, you know, we might not be proud of at times, but for her to overcome herself and to apologize to me and ask for forgiveness, the magnitude of something like that is so powerful. And I'm certainly not above an apology, but you know, that meant the world to me.
Mm-hmm.
That meant more to me than winning that fight.
Oh yeah, I definitely can see why. And it like just reading it, I was like, that was just a big moment. Like not only just for Shannon, but also for you, I felt, because I was like, before then, I don't think there was ever a moment like that. And then afterwards, I started seeing more of that passionate and empathy of during fight or after fights, you would go up to your opponents and like tell them what a great fight, shake their hands, even with all their fans and their team right then and there just staring you down.
Yeah.
But that little moment of that connection, it
Mm-hmm.
definitely triggered something in everyone, in not only your opponent but their fans and their team of like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this is sportsmanship right here. This is,
Yes.
yeah.
Those teaching moments are important. And I believe that us as human beings, when we're put in a position and I have very strong faith, I believe if God puts us in a position where we can teach others, that, you know, it's a big responsibility. And I always knew as a female boxer and being one of the oldest in the sport, that it was my responsibility to to show good sportsmanship and to honor these women, because I knew that they would take that on, you know, in other aspects of their lives. But yes, and I know which fight you're talking about specifically. That was my second Golden Gloves title, and that was a really hard fight that I won. I earned that fight. That was rough because it was just me and two people in my corner walking into her camp, into her gym, into her town, into her backyard. She
Mm-hmm.
had the whole gym was full of her fans. I thought that they needed to stop that fight in like round two because
Yeah.
she was bleeding a lot, and she was young. She was a teenager too, I think, or in her early 20s. But the ref wasn't going to stop the fight because she was the hometown girl, and that girl was strong. She didn't stop. I busted her nose.
Mm-hmm.
When you break a nose, it bleeds a lot, and I imagine it hurts quite a bit.
Yeah.
And you know, and before that fight occurred, you know, she had people in her posse mad dogging me, you know, and that's normal. It's a fight. It's boxing. So yeah, when I took the win, let's just say that nobody in her camp applauded. So I had two people, you know, it's like this. But yes, after, you know, she's bleeding and everybody's surrounding her, you know, hoping that she's okay. And I had to work my way through this crowd of people mad dogging me. And I think they didn't know what I was going to say to her. I think that's what it was. And I walked up to her and I first said, you know, are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I embraced her and I said, I want you to know what you did is remarkable. Not many women have what it takes to step in that square. Not many people in the world can box because it's so difficult and dangerous. And I said, you're one of few women that have done this. And it meant the world to her.
Yeah. You
And
know,
not to reveal any spoilers, I ended up facing that girl again too. in another fight.
Yeah. Hopefully this isn't a spoiler, but I do want to mention, well, this isn't a spoiler. I do want to mention earlier you said you imagine that breaking your nose just hurts, which I love because that just goes to show you never broke your nose. That you were always in that ring and you
I was
were,
lucky. I think I was really lucky. People ask me about nothing broke. I was never a bleeder. I never bled. Lots of black eyes and stuff, but I actually liked that. I wore those very proudly. I
yeah.
earned those. I was very fortunate that I had nothing busted in my face. I was very
Yeah.
lucky.
Specifically because your ring name is Disaster Diva. So I was like, I love the fact that this girl never got like broken. She never got a broken bone, never got a broken nose. The bruises, you can hide them here and there, and you still went to your reporting job like that too.
I did, and it was funny because I'd come in and and like for a while I would try to cover them up with makeup, and then I was just like, why? I'm not. What am I hiding? And people in the newsroom, all my colleagues and fellow reporters, they knew I boxed, so it was actually kind of cool, But yeah, I was, wearing my, going from reporter, like, and the reporters' clothing, very conservative, to putting on all my wraps and my gloves and all my mean stuff to box. So, it was like a great polarity, but it was really cool, and
Yeah.
I had a lot of support in the newsroom too. I was very lucky.
There's actually one part that we were talking about this earlier here in the Hollywood Park Casino, that you invited your colleagues to come and watch you. And no spoilers on how the fight went, but the fact that they actually went, loved it, and then after when you went back to your job, like congratulated you and were like, that was a great fight. When's the next one? That was cool. I was like, man, I love how she's getting so much support from going from only 2 people in her corner to like now building a fan base, having her friends there, and later on, I know it did take a toll within your family. Your father loved it because he had a connection to it. He was a boxer himself, but then your brother Tony, like completely different story.
Well, and that's so funny because yes, I had a lot of support for the most part. Yes, and Tony was interesting because he was so passionate about not wanting his little sister to box. And he was the one that would say stuff that was just really scary because, as a fighter or an athlete or anybody who's trying to manifest a very big dream, we understand the importance of staying positive. You have to have a positive mindset. So, that means staying away from negativity. Well, Tony, I don't think he was intentionally being negative. I think he was trying to protect me and protect his little sister, but he would say stuff like, "You're going to get killed." Why are you doing this? You're going to get killed. This is the hurt business. He would say stuff like, you understand that if your opponent kills you, she gets to go home and have dinner. He would say stuff like that. So there was a point in time, and this is in the book where, I love my brother so much. But there was a time where I had to distance myself from him simply because I had to focus on my fighting. And I couldn't hold any space for anything that wasn't 100% positive.
Yeah. And I definitely know that is difficult because you reconnected with him or connected with him more like in your 30s. And so it was a very distant relationship. Then going from being distant to being best friends, then having to distance yourself again because
that was rough.
Yeah. I bet, like, I know. Sorry, what was that?
I said, I appreciate that you got that.
Yeah. I think so many people deal with that family dynamic of putting your dreams before your family. Is that okay? And I feel like you did the best possible thing, because later on you did go back to family, and now it's hopefully the relationship is all great.
Oh, yes. Tony's been wonderful. Of course he loves, being in the book. He's still one of my greatest fans. That's lovely. My mother, of course, didn't like it either. She didn't want her baby girl. She didn't want her baby girl getting beaten up. And I would always try my mother, like, Mom, I am good. I'm good at it. I'm not getting beaten up all the time. And what I got to say, I didn't win every fight. And all the losses are in my book too. But, my mom was just looking out for her little girl. It was just like, yeah, after I retired, of course, resuming my relationship with Tony has been lovely. My father was very supportive because my father was in the Navy and he boxed while he was in the Navy, and he was long encouraging me to write the book. I retired in 2000, so it only took me 20 years to write this book. But I'm happy that it came out on Valentine's Day of this year, because my father sadly passed away on September 21st. So he was able to read the book before he passed away. And that meant the world to me, because he was always saying, you can't let this die with you. You have to write this book. You can't let it die with you. I mean, it took 20 years to write it because of the vulnerability I revealed, because of all the pain I revealed. And that was hard to remember and to relive and to write into words. But once I came through on the other side, I knew it was purposeful, and I knew I was doing it for a reason. I didn't know what reason at the time. It was just a prompting, an intuitive thing. It's, hard to explain, but the feedback that I have received, and especially during this time of COVID, of having a book come out during a pandemic, the feedback has been so lovely, and it's been helpful to people. So I know my book came out at the right place and the exact right time, even in the middle of the pandemic, especially in the pandemic. Because I feel like this pandemic has been a standing 8 count since March, and we're all standing, okay, can we survive? I don't know. Yes, I don't want to stay in this fight, but I know I got to stay in this fight, and I know I'm going to come through on the other side. And I know all of us will, but we got to stay strong, and we got to stay resilient, and we got to be vulnerable and share those vulnerabilities with each other to become strong. Exactly. And we will get through this.
Hey, thank you for checking out part 1 of our episode with Alicia Doyle. Come back next week for part 2. And to be kept up to date with all the latest episodes, please subscribe here on YouTube or on your favorite podcast apps, and follow us on Instagram at CommunicationsAF. I hope to communicate with you all soon, AF.